languages or mother tongue, India's linguistic diversity, in what the nation really needs to know. I will not go to this very long list. A very important book, which is a very important classic, is Linguistic Structure and Language Dynamics in South Asia, which he has co-edited with Anvita Abi and R.S. Gupta. And her most recent book, and I think that's very relevant for what we are discussing, is The Just a Caravan, which he has translated and annotated by Ayesha Kidwai. And this is Zuban 2021. But for us, Ayesha has also been the one who has led us through many difficult moments in protecting the principles of gender equality and justice. So we start with this forum with a lot of very dear colleagues, and I hand over to Ayesha.
Thank you, Bishop, for the completely unwarranted, undeserved, and totally exaggerated introduction. But she's from Theatre and Performance Studies, for what we have to make much ado about nothing. Thank you. So, I have to tell you that this is truly going to be informal. This is truly going to be informal, which will involve the JNUTA president being sprawled on the ground. But I can't actually see any of you because Advancing Aid has declared and agitated that I shall have to wear my short-sighted spectacles. And I object to the fact that I'm a moderator of this panel because that is to ensure that I don't ask long questions. But what I am committed to do is to give reasonably fulsome introductions to three friends, and like all of you are friends, even if we don't know each other personally, but three friends who have known each other for a very long time. And so it's wonderful to have Jayati back again, Vrinda, who never ever leaves, and Nivedita is Nivedita Menon, who is actually the host of every JNUTA. So let me briefly, but I think deeply, introduce to you our panelists. For those of you, and I hope there are lots of new students here. So Jayati Ghosh has taught economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University for nearly 35 years. And since January 2021, she has been Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She is the author or the editor of scores of books and some scholarly articles. And she is also the recipient of several international prizes that recognize her distinguished contribution to social sciences. She also writes regularly for popular media, including newspapers, journals, and blogs. She was the executive secretary of the Ideas Associate, which is the International Development Economics Associate. It is an international network of heterodox development economists from 2000 to 2021. So she will leave things undone. She has advised several states and national governments and consulted for various international organizations, including ILO, UNDP, and UN. Most recently, in 2022, she was appointed to the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism, which is mandated to provide a vision for international cooperation to deal with current and future challenges. So from those of us who have been part of those 25 years, the group meeting, I think that it is wonderful that the UN Secretary General will benefit from Jayati's excellent multitasking skills and extraordinary efficiency, but also from her warm, friendly, but always incisive criticism. Because perhaps there is no other economist who will begin an untied lecture with the question, mainstream economics, why do I not love tea? So Vrinda Program, our second guest, the one who never leaves, has been practicing as an independent lawyer at the Supreme Court of India, the High Courts and the Trial Court since 1989. One of the most prominent human rights lawyers in the country, Vrinda obtained a law degree from Delhi University and a master's in law from New York University. In her long and illustrious career, Vrinda has contributed to the drafting of laws to protect women and children from domestic violence and sexual violence, besides advocating for laws prohibiting torture and legislation for protection against communal and targeted violence. In the courts, she has appeared in prominent human rights cases and represented women and child survivors of domestic and sexual violence, victims and survivors of communal massacres, extrajudicial killings and custodial tortures, sexual minorities, trade unions, and political activists, and journalists. And we can, I think there is perhaps everybody most probably knows somebody whom Vrinda has represented. Her research and writing, and she writes regularly in the media and in law journals, is to inquire into the role of law in the subordination of women, the effect of these so-called security laws on human rights, specifically those of women, undocumented workers, internally displaced persons, and those who have either been tortured or intentionally disappeared. At the level of policy, she has also actively engaged with UN human rights mechanisms, including the Universal Periodic Review and the UN's Professional Report. But above all, and I say this from the depth of my heart, that Vrinda has been the staunchest ally of the little quest of justice that do not make it to the courts and law. And her role in supporting particularly women's rights movement in their homes and their workplaces in this very university across the country is just, I mean, it can never be acknowledged enough. In fact, on any WhatsApp group, most discussions on such events or incidents inevitably end with the conclusion, let's ask Vrinda. And a decision that people make this decision is with the full confidence that Vrinda will always be available to be asked and will be always ready to help and support. Finally, Nivedita Menon is professor at the Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory at the School of International Studies. Again, very iconic scholar. She has apart from research papers in Indian and international journals, as well as books. She is the author of, and who would ever say this after a book written by an academic, the best-selling which is 2012, and I think has been translated into what? How many languages? Just 4, sorry. Subversion was an earlier book from 2004. Feminist Politics Beyond the Law, and they are actually very well seated right next to each other. So, law and the beyond the lawyer, and power and contestation, which is India after 1989. Which is co-written with Vrinda. Nehru is also a regular commentator on contemporary issues on this collective blog, Kafia Online, which many of you would see. She's one of the founders, and is active in democratic politics in India on a range of issues. She is also a translator of fiction and non-fiction from Indian Malayalam into English and from Malayalam into Hindi, and has received the A.K. Nanujan Award for Translation. Nidhi's iconic status as India's leading feminist thinker often masks what all her students and friends admire Nidhi the most for: the fearless independence of her thought and her relentless engagement with different kinds of views. It is from Nidhi that I think many of us have learned that it is not enough to hold an opinion. That opinion must be stated, it must be defended, and it can be changed. In her reminders that the job of academics and of the university is to strive towards a world in which all the hierarchies that divide us are erased forever. Nidhi is simply an inspiration. So welcome, Nivedita. So without further ado, the format is this, and we know that there will be a lot of questions. So I do not intend to speak very much in terms of questions, but we actually do want to make it a discussion. So questions might be directed at each individual, but others will have a little time to chip in. Also, we will keep at least half an hour for questions at the end. So I request the speaker, I already sent you a stern email, so please follow my lead. So, Amal, with flags of Mosaic, JNUTA, it is entitled Feminist Perspectives on Home, Work in the Law. So I think it would make sense for me to begin to ask our panelists what each of them think is, or maybe particularly their feminist perspective on these issues, on work, home, and law. Is it all only about focusing on women? So each of them will get a little time to speak here. Is it all and only about focusing on women and the problems they face at home, at work, and in the legal system? What special ingredients does a feminist perspective bring to understanding and working in your respective fields? So maybe for you, well, basically everything, but politics, etc. Jayati, if you could speak about the economy, and Vrinda about the justice system. So Jayati, what do you think?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for that amazing, again, overstated introduction. And I don't know how much of our time you have taken up in this. so now we'll keep it short. So yes, what I do want to say is that the critical thing about work is that most economists don't understand it. They don't actually they haven't even recognized the correct definition of it. So, and that means therefore the statistical systems don't recognize it. Just to give you an example, in India we're saying the work participation rate of women is 18%, whereas we all know that most women work, right? And in fact, that survey, if you go and look at the details, they say, oh, there are these codes 91 and 92, engaged in household duties. And engaged in household duties plus, which is everything from collecting water and firewood to kitchen gardening to teaching children to you name it, all of that. But they are not workers. They're just there at home. So this failure to recognize unpaid work, which is it's very strong in India, but it is widespread across the economics profession, is absolutely crucial because it allows all our economic analysis, not just looking at employment, it allows all of it to pretend that this entire substratum doesn't exist. That there's this huge amount. I mean, if you actually you add up all the work that women do in India, 86% of women are actively working. And in fact, more women work than men. But we can ignore all of that because we have actually ensured that this unrecognized, unremunerated work becomes the substratum that you can just allow to happen. Now, we used to think of all this as gender blind. It's not gender blind. It's gender exploitative. It's not that they don't know. They know fully well. Because economic policy and capitalism and employers rely on this. They actually depend on this unpaid work, which we call social reproduction, whatever, but they depend on it because they can cut down on basic social spending, knowing that someone else is going to do the burden. They can do all kinds of other things, assuming that, okay, the market will not allow you access to this care, but someone at the home will deliver it for you. And essentially, this ability to use unpaid work is absolutely critical in understanding the dynamics of any economy and global capitalism. So we ignore it at that level. It's not just about women. It's very much about how that system relies on the unpaid labor of women and how the system realizes what many of us don't, but we're beginning to realize that why does this unpaid work keep getting done? How come the economy keeps happening when it is so treated badly, if you like? is because you care about those whom you care for. So you cannot withdraw it. Now, when you can't withdraw something, what does that mean? You can't go on strike. That's the ultimate weapon of the worker, right? That you don't have. So you lose all your bargaining power, and that's what enables that continued exploitation. I could go on and on, but I won't. So I will stop at this point and come back to that.
Yeah, thank you. So let's, I was going to focus on home, so home work law. And Ayesha, of course, iconoclastic and idiosyncratic as ever, we decided on an order, I will start with home, etc. She just said Jayati and that's it. So we'll have to get going now in the opposite direction. Thank you for that. So Okay, so when you think of home, so let's start with the most lovely idea of home, or what we imagine when we use the word home, which is basically something like this: a space in which we share ideas, in which you can expect people to be there for you in a crisis. All of us in this room form nests and nests and nests of connections. When we fall ill, there are friends we can call upon. When we need money, there are people who lend us money. If there is a problem in your home, somebody will come and pick you up. If something happens on campus, you can turn. So this idea, this is a home. This can be a home. Now, it can be a home in many ways. It's a home for many of us, but there are people who feel alienated. We don't realize that there are people and sections who are feeling alienated. There are people who don't want us to feel at home and who would like to disrupt this idea of home. So there's an inside and outside. There's a bore baire all the time when you think about home. So it's actually quite appropriate that the film, one of the films, will be bore baire art. So when you start with the idea of home in this way, which is a group of multiple connections, networks of people who are there for one another and love one another in different ways, without rules. There are no rules about, the rules are only about care and dignity. The rules are only about respecting one another, and the rules are also about being open to being criticized by people who don't feel part of your home. And so your answer is not meant to be defensive. No, we are not like that. No, we have to make an ideal home of the sort that I'm imagining. What's happening to this? We should be able to stop, take stock, reassess our privilege, and so on, right? So, starting with this idea of home, let's go to the actual home, the home inside, which is the home, which is the patriarchal heterosexual, based on the patriarchal heterosexual marriage, in which there is a very clear hierarchy of gender and age, and with gender trumping age. That is to say, the older sons the young sons will eventually have authority over the older mother, which is based on a very violent institution which we don't recognize as violent, which Jayati indicated, which is the sexual division of labor. It's violent because it constrains the lives of women to such an extent that if you walk into a classroom of 16-year-old boys and 12-year-old boys and 12-year-old girls, if you ask them what do you think you're going to be, the ambitions of those women those girls, those women are already restricted by what they know their life is going to be, which is limited by the heterosexual patriarchal marriage. And this sexual division of labor means that that in certain, so it brings in the important thing about the idea of the sexual division of labor is that you can see class and caste operating there as well, because economically better off women can hire poorer women to do the work. So it's women hiring women because the work is not that of the man. And if the poorer woman doesn't come, the woman, the woman has to take on that responsibility. And of course, it means the poorer women, the women of lower caste, the way in which household work operates, which kind of workers are allowed into what spaces in the home, So there is that violent, and it's violent even when it is most loving. In fact, when it is very loving, also the violence is implicit because there are rules about who you can love, what you can do, what is expected of you, and always, always, always the horizon of the compulsory heterosexual marriage, which awaits you. So that is the home in the inside, and the home in the world would be, let's say, a hostel, where you come from out of that home, you come into the hostel. Now, is the hostel private or public? Is the host, and what happens is women's hostels in particular continually reproduce family norms, and they function like the most efficient family, even more so than your own family, because ultimately in your own family, it is possible you can throw a tantrum and make your father let you do something. But in a hostel, there are rules, and the rules involve your being home at 6, etc. So you will notice something very interesting in the current regime. In the past 4 or 5 or 6 years, university authorities are constantly contacting parents for disciplinary action all over the country. Students protest, they call the parents. And fortunately, many parents say, but they're adults, they're doing what they do. Fortunately, there are some parents who do that. But I know right now in Delhi University, right now over the screening of the BBC documentary, the inquiry committee that has been set up to inquire into the screening of a documentary, which is widely available, as we know, is going to call parents as well. I'm going to inquire into and tell them what's wrong. So this replication of the patriarchal home in the home outside, which is the hostel, is something we need to think about. And I just want to end this part with this very lovely way in which one of our research scholars from our center, Nivedita Menon, in my actual dissertation, talked about women's hostels as being a threshold. And I think that's an interesting space, right? Because it's neither public nor private, both public and private. I mean, we could think more about that.
So to take off a bit from where Nivi left, actually, it's interesting to follow on from there. Because she mentioned about the public and the private. In law, there was a very, very clear distinction and demarcation between what is the law operates in the public sphere and not in the private sphere. And at least the feminist jurists and jurisprudence has actually breached that. And particularly criminal law, there's always been personal law in the private sphere, but in terms of criminal law, entering into the private sphere, which one former Delhi High Court judge very famously described as, it's like a bull in a china shop, because you have laws which are preventing violence within the family, within the marriage, within the home. And we know that now there are a slew of such laws, whether you have them relating to matrimonial home in the Indian Penal Code 498A, 304B, dowry-related cruelty, death, or you have the domestic violence law. So that breach, which law had to make, which otherwise law is not supposed to enter that place. Since India did inherit the Indian Penal Code from a colonial system where the home had a lord and master, etc., that conceptualization and that imagination continued in the criminal law, and it has actually been largely women's movements interventions which created or conceptualized the woman. I think and while we see the woman now clearly in different aspects of the criminal law and the criminal justice system, it's not as though there's been an overall change. And since the time of Professor Lautika Sarkar, for instance, there's been this ongoing conversation about engendering the law. For instance, throughout criminal law, there is a doctrine that is used, which is a standard, a legal standard that is used, which is called the reasonable man. Because how does a judge assess whether the conduct of, say, the accused, if the accused behaved in X ways or accused behaves in Y way, how does the court assess whether this could or could not happen? It's through a doctrine which is used globally called the doctrine of the reasonable man. And people like Dr. Lautika Sarkar, one of the early feminist law teachers we've had, raised the question about, but what about the reasonable woman? And is there a reasonable woman in the criminal justice system? And how do you address it? And one area where we run into that even today, and where courts are totally bewildered, is that, for instance, to take one example, is how does a raped survivor react, respond, behave, conduct herself post a sexual assault? It is beyond the comprehension and imagination of most judges. And therefore, they fall back on stereotypes, rape myths, Bollywood masala, etc., and keep trying to impose them. So the criminal justice system actually did not conceptualize a woman to enter. And when it did, it was largely through the intervention, as I said, of women's movements, asking for changes and reforms in the law, where she was then seen as a victim. But then the victim also had to conduct herself in certain ways. She was not seen as a person who is entering the legal space. Presently, I think, because of a lot of conversation that has happened, and most of it has not been conducted by lawyers, thankfully, there is a decisive push to reimagine and to revisit this. So stereotypes, etc. You have a judgment of the Supreme Court by Justice Ravindra Bhatt, who has challenged and has actually written down commandments for judges of what not to look for and what kind of stereotypes to avoid, because they're playing themselves out repeatedly in courts. I think Ayesha is getting a little anxious with time, but when one looks at just two more points I want to point out. So when I began practice in 1989 in the trial courts, there were perhaps 5 women criminal lawyers in this city. So you can imagine what was happening. I'm talking about criminal lawyers, not in other branches of law. There would be more even then. The fact that today there are many more, the fact that they interface with judges, with other lawyers, does lead to a huge change. And one can see that manifest itself. It's not as though things have improved or things have improved, but they've not necessarily changed. And it is a process that one is part of. But if one was to look at the criminal law and the criminal justice system as a concept, as a philosophy, any feminist understanding would collide with it. The criminal law and the criminal justice system is premised fundamentally on power of the state. And it is about the state then regulating, controlling, for instance, deciding what is an offense. While certain offenses have been codified, the huge change made in sexual laws post-Nivedita, in which many students included who were from JNU were taking a leading role, Jayati drew our attention to sexual exploitation, etc., within the home and the family and the labor, which is not recognized in economic terms. It's not recognized in law also. Not paying minimum wages is not a crime. Nobody goes to jail. You can't lodge an FIR if somebody doesn't pay you minimum wages. You can lodge FIRs for damage to property, but you can't lodge an FIR for no minimum wage. So the conceptualization of criminal law where the state actually has to be in control, whether for sedition, etc., is to my mind something that feminists have not begun to explore or push the boundaries of. So you see women's rights intervention, but a feminist intervention would have to reimagine the criminal justice system very differently.
So since I think, I don't know whether the picture that Vrinda post is actually exactly hopeful, but it is not hopeless. In that sustained interventions on the defendants have at least split the judgments, have created, but the home maybe remains something of a kernel, which to be able to regulate the home, where as Jayati points out, relations of affect and love tie you into not being a striking mother, tie you into not resisting. That you can't walk off as only changing the attitude to yourself. That and the space for the intervention of law to regulate home, where one should be able to fight an individual battle. How can that space possibly open up in the home? That is, if the space where a law will continue to not have to intervene, how do we change our homes?
Well, I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't, and I think many feminists would correctly not be comfortable with the law regulating the home because the law is an instrument which is a blunt instrument, and very fine lawyers can work on it, but usually when there's a law, it's a blunt instrument. And I believe that many feminists have recognized, so some of you may be familiar with Graham Gibson, J.K. Graham Gibson, the two feminist writers who wrote under one name. They hyphenated their surnames and they wrote as J.K. Graham Gibson. One of them passed away a few years ago. But J.K. Graham Gibson, writing about capitalism, but they use feminism as an analogy where without a revolution, without a one moment transformation, there have been such granular day to day changes that, for example, Vrinda said when she started there were so many women lawyers, and now there are many more. All of us have come from homes where we have seen, and especially if you've reached the university, you've come from homes where you've seen the growing and changes to the patriarchal rules of the home. So I believe that the home will be transformed from inside, from daughters and sons and children of any gender asking these questions, changing the sexual division of labor. So every day is an evolution if you're a feminist, in a way. So when you have, if you have a son asking his father, why don't you do X work today? That's a moment of rebellion. So I imagine and I see homes as being, and they already transformed. This is not some kind of utopian vision. Right now, there are young people and middle-aged people living in families which are not heterosexual and patriarchal. There are groups and communities, and there are queer collectives, and all kinds of ways in which people are living, which is already transforming the home. And of course, what I've said is kind of about urban middle classes, but even among working class people, we don't, there's work on it, but we don't encounter the different ways. But every time a woman walks out on an alcoholic husband, every time, and those alcoholic husbands are very much part of the urban middle class too. So I'm saying that there is a way in which families are changing, but the violence of compulsory marriage is there. It hangs like a sword over, and what that sword does is it basically disables women from being prepared for anything but marriage, and especially the poorer you are. So they will work, they will be employed, they will be wage labor, but they have to be married, and then they're stuck. So I think there's something about we have to confront marriage, and the only way I can think of the law helping is by a ban on marriage. And see what happens. See what happens. What if you're not ever allowed to marry off your children? It's a nice fantasy. It's a nice fantasy.
Interesting, she says that at a time when there are petitions in the Supreme Court for same-sex marriage to be recognized. So it's a complicated space.
Yeah, so I was reminded maybe when you're saying that things are changing and they will begin in the home. I think Vrinda's idea of the threshold is actually quite right. It's not just inside the home. It cannot happen just inside the home. You would only have the guts to do something inside the home if there are other things happening around you. And that's also true of, marriage the weirdness of marriage is the persistence. I agree with you. But, yeah, but I think that the persistence of marriage is not necessarily something that is only patriarchally driven. I mean, as she said, right? At the moment I'm teaching in the US, and everybody who's gay or lesbian, everybody wants to be married, So there is something about that, I don't know, notion of permanence or whatever. And of course, they're not permanent, but the point is that you think for a while. So whatever, there's something in that. I think what you really have to get at, okay, sorry to be so crudely economic and deterministic, but ultimately it's the division of labor that sucks, right? That's really the critical thing. And the point is that marriages are determined based on that division of labor. And let me just remind all of us, because we keep forgetting it, it's not biological. The only thing you have to do as a woman is get pregnant, have a baby. And okay, breastfeed for a while. Even that, by the way, historically has been outsourced, right? Now you can outsource even having a baby. So let's remember that that's it. Everything else can be shared, can be done by others. And the fact that it's not, and that women end up persisting and thinking that that's basically our job, that's the thing that has to be changed. And that, of course, drives everything else, right? So, yeah, I think it is certainly marriage, the way it's dealt with, but marriage is part of a broader structure that is all about the control of women's labor, yeah? Reproductive and other labor. So.
Any kind of feminist history or looking back at the past finds these moments either in writings or in people's lives of insurrections. So that the state that we live in is one which is always never a certainty in the favor of marriage. It is, I think, a particular fact of the effect of the last 2 or 3 centuries that the state has to respond to some questions, like insurrections and the women and that. And since we have a vast majority of people whose lives have not changed. And there are these little bubbles of insurrection. Does that, Vrinda, make you feel that it's okay for the state to make laws on what is the role of the state? Because I think I agree with Devi that the state is over-determined. And it can intrude in every aspect of your life. We see what it can do. For example, the triple talaq that has been passed that enables a woman to bans an illegal practice, makes a practice illegal, but then creates a situation in which Muslim women are being asked to incarcerate Muslim men. And not only them, anybody can go and make a complaint. So that there is like a long arm of the law. So how do we then deal with this conundrum? What is the welfare state? So is the fact that work is unpaid? Do we want a recognition directly of women's labor in the home in terms of payment? And is of that, do we want then the fact that there has to be, we do not want laws that will allow the state to go deep into the home, taking Amy's point of mind. So I both of you.
Okay, so this is Nivi and my favorite conversation which we've been having for last 2.5 decades. Neither of us have shifted our position. We're very persuasive, surely. Okay, so see, what does law do in a society and country like ours, where there is cup child, there is caste, there is religion of all hues? It also sets a normative standard. The normative standard is not set in the family of what should be achieved. It's not as though any of us, at least I did, learn equality or respect for others in our families. These things we have to actually acquire outside our homes. So this is not part of our culture. So what is the law? Who sets the normative standard? In our system, the law assumes that role. Why is beating your wife wrong? It wasn't wrong some decades, century ago. You only had to have a certain measure of the stick under English law. Secondly, if it's not as though I disagree that law is a blunt weapon or that the law will inherently be partisan towards those who are more powerful within the system. But if you look around, you will see that a lot of the groups, for instance, the Dalit activists have actually fought very hard to get amendments in the Prevention of Atrocities Act. Does it necessarily yield results? No, I think there is a dismal scorecard that emerges. So somewhere there is a gap which needs to be acknowledged, and we need to talk about systems and processes and accountability more. When I was saying that the criminal justice system is actually all about power to the state and controlling people in different ways as subjects, and the only place it's giving to women is, okay, you can make a complaint against the individual man. But the state is not ceding power. The state is only saying, I will now play arbiter between the individuals. The real push that needs to come is about holding the state accountable. And that accountability, in fact, there was some attempt made when some of us were engaged in a process of post the experience of both 1984 and 2002, the anti-Muslim violence in Gujarat, that we need a law that will create accountability of the state and its agents to protect particularly minorities from this kind of violence, whether perpetrated by mobs or indirectly by the state. And the reason why no government was willing to support that was because if you are in a democracy, and recently the Chief Justice of India famously said the Constitution is a feminist document. I think it needs a lot of unpacking, but that was his perspective. So if you do have a feminist document as the Constitution of India, then you will be required to make accountability the centerpiece of the criminal justice system, particularly state officials, etc. So that is really where we are struggling, and I think that's the part that we need to, when this government, for instance, famously says all colonial hangovers, laws, policies have to be checked. It's a very good thing. So what is the colonial hangover? It's the legal immunities given to people who today run the state. Let me give you a very small example. You cannot actually prosecute a public servant without getting permission, even if they murder, without getting permission from the state, from that very government. When the Constitution of India comes in, when we become independent, the only thing they change is they replace servants of the crown with public servants in the Indian Penal Code, but the legal immunities and privilege remain unchallenged. So that is the colonial past that we need to shed and create accountability mechanisms, because I do believe that given the stratification of our society and the kind of, we are not going to be able to negotiate and navigate this without external assistance, and to my mind, the democratic state is meant precisely to do this, and it has to intervene, and that's the gap and the negotiation, not that it's happening anytime soon.
No, I want to ask you something, which is that I don't know whether this is the kind of thing he also asks you when you're 2.5 decade thing. But so you're right that you need that law. I will remind you that according to the latest survey, 69% of women think that a husband is justified in beating the wife if she doesn't cook properly and all that, right? But yeah, so in Assam now, all these people are being rounded up because they married girls who were below the legal age, right? Under POCSO. Because people are also mentioning that you should have been doing this for people in Gujarat as well who married, when they were children. But so I'm just saying that there is a weaponization for sure. But I'm just saying that that kind of intervention, it can be misused so readily and so easily. So what's the way in which you kind of balance that?
The weaponization of law that you see in the triple talaq, which incidentally is the triple talaq was struck down by the court, not by any government, no matter what they say. And Muslim women went to court saying that it should be struck down, which was their right. What we're seeing in Assam is actually the pinnacle of the weaponization of laws and the rhetoric and the bogey of any state being there for welfare or securing rights of women and children. They have totally weaponized and used it to their end. Therefore, when I say whether it is sentencing, whether it is even what will be an offense, and who will have the power to complain, that cannot be ceded to the state. You need to create offenses, but you don't need to keep giving. That power has to remain with the people who are affected. Why? Unfortunately, we each time cede power to the state alongside. And I think that's where I would make a distinction between what a women's rights intervention would be and a feminist intervention would be. And I think if the feminist articulation of violence against women has to today be very, very distinct from what every character, political party, particularly the ruling party, is talking about women, that the media is screaming about women. And that is about control of the woman. It's not about freedom for the woman. But yes, in Assam, what has happened is the weaponization of law by those in power. But isn't law the main terrain of negotiating power today? I mean, particularly as economists, I would like to understand from you, in fact, our lives are today regulated from the 90s. All aspects of our lives are regulated way more by law than they were before because the economic structure changed. There is no aspect of anybody's life today that is not regulated by some element of law. And that is a function of the nature of the economy. So, you can't, it's about creating more and more space and taking that power. I'm not sure it's going to be wished away.
Yeah, thank you for reading my anxious expression. No, I'm not going to, I just want to make 2 or 3 points from the discussion so far. And yes, this is very much the debate that Vrinda and I have, and we continue to be very good friends, which is that the way in which Jayati put it also, that there are other kinds of struggles are necessary, etc. So there is an issue with the law being the only space. Now, we know that feminist lawyers and feminist judicial practice is necessary and important, but there are other, I think, spaces. So I just want to pick up 2 or 3 issues that came up and they were sort of left trailing, and I really wanted to talk about it. Very quickly about payment and wages for housework. I thought I would just alert us all to that this is a debate of kind of the 70s, 80s in Western feminism, and it's not an idea that feminists eventually espouse, because the question becomes who pays the wages? Does the husband pay the wages? And if so, then the husband is your employer. And if it is the employer who has to pay the husband the wages for the wife, in other words, because the man's labor is dependent on invisible labor that has gone in, the reproductive labor that enables him to work the next day. So the employer should pay for that invisible labor. That's another possibility. But of course, that is not even a feasible scenario. And worse still, even if it were feasible, it completely concretizes the sexual division of labor. It makes the sexual division of labor natural, institutionalized, rather than saying, let's break this up and let it not be there. About marriage, I did kind of frivolously say ban marriage. But it's not entirely frivolous, and I think the desire for marriage is because it is the only way in which you could say so and so can pull the plug on me if I'm dying, so and so can inherit my property, so and so can look after the child we adopted together. This is the only institution that permits it. So obviously people desire it. So there has to be a way in which we develop civil kinds of. See, the problem is, as Vrinda said, it's a problem that we are entirely legible to the state at all times. And the state is completely opaque to us. The RTI has gone and Aadhaar is in. Right? The RTI is practically dead, so we don't know anything about the state. And Aadhaar is 100% now, we have absolutely no other option but to have Aadhaar. Although it's not even it's private entity, UI80. So marriage, it becomes important for this reason, and so we need to be thinking about, and of course within queer domains there are debates about this. But you can understand the desire for marriage. I doubt it's also partly, I think, permanence and so on, but partly because it's the only way in which you can actually be legible to the state in a society where if you're not legible to the state, you're penalized. So there has to be a way, in an anarchistic kind of way in which we get over this. We go under it. How do we get under the radar? Our question should be, how do we get under the radar? How do we develop documents and legal things, to use a technical term, legal things, to enable our children to be looked after and our property to be whatever and all that. I wanted to say one thing about marital rape, because this question of criminalizing triple talaq came up, and I'm opposed to criminalizing in principle, and criminalizing rape or criminalizing triple talaq, criminalizing marital rape or triple talaq. But it's interesting, as another lawyer pointed out, Malvika Rajputia pointed out, that it's an interesting system in which a Muslim man can go to jail if he pronounces triple talaq, although that's banned already. But any man can rape his wife, and it's not a criminal offense. Now, yes, that's very striking, but I think marital rape should be a condition for divorce. It should be a civil issue, and I don't. So this is something that I think would come up, because why? What is it that the woman gets by putting the man in jail? She would be much better off getting a divorce and having decent alimony and maintenance for the children than just getting the hell out of that violent situation. So there's that. And finally, just about age of marriage, this business about POXO, and I think all of us, all feminists, have been very troubled by the continuous raising of the age of consent, because it sounds very progressive, but effectively it means that consensual sex is called rape if you are even 17 and so on. And there have been interesting and important studies of rape cases in the Delhi High Court, for example, by a journalist, Rukmini, I think, where she found that 75% of them, or a very large percentage, were actually situations of consensual sex between young people, which parents went to court So, it's the long arm of that patriarchal, heterosexual, violent family home that is just creeping into every space. And I think we have to think of going under the radar rather than more criminalizing.
Okay, so I have to say two things. So actually you have the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, where women are going if there is sexual abuse, and the law recognizes sexual abuse by husband also. So yes, I think marital rape requires discussion, and we may actually agree on that. So I'm not sure we need to go under the radar. I would start doing things, dismantling the radar rather than going under the radar.
Okay, very quickly before Ayesha bashes us up. So on the issue of payment for housework, I mean, it's a very stupid idea, as Nivi has already emphasized, and for many, many different reasons. But what do you do then about unpaid care work in particular? So feminist economists have basically argued for what is called the 5 R's. Okay, you recognize it, first of all. That is to say, how do you figure out how much is being done? You do time use surveys. And this is even one of the things the Secretary General has agreed to, that you get every country to do regular time use surveys so you know how much is paid work, how much is unpaid work, how much is social, relational, and leisure time. Second, you having recognized it, you try and reduce as much as possible. So you reduce the things which are unnecessary unpaid work, whether it is through recognition or through providing amenities, what access to water, access to fuel, etc., you try and reduce. Third, you redistribute. You don't have to keep all of it in the home. So you redistribute between the home, the state, the private provider, the cooperatives, the community, and you redistribute within the home. Tougher call, we all know that, but as far as possible, you try and redistribute. Or you reward the ones who are doing the paid care work. Because one of the things about unpaid care work is that paid care workers therefore get massively underpaid. Because everyone thinks anyway it's done for free. Why do you want to pay an ASHA? Why do you want to pay an Anganwadi worker? Why do they deserve a minimum wage? So reward the care workers as much as they are necessary for society. Value their work and reward them. And finally represent them, give them a voice in the policies that affect them, including unpaid workers. In fact, the ILO has finally recognized that it has to include unpaid workers, mostly women, in the definition of workers so as to have a voice in the platforms and the policies that affect them. So there are ways around it. You don't have to say, okay, we have to give it a monetary value. That's because we're so all imbued by capitalism that we think nothing has a value till it has a monetary value.
So this unfortunately has to be the last question that I asked. Let me assure you that I sent all these ladies my 5 questions and I've actually never even managed to ask one of them. And I've been falsely accused, but this is what happens in adults. So I think the last question I want to ask is about us men and women here, because the one question you didn't answer, but you all did indirectly answer it, which was that feminism, a feminist thing is not all about women. It's about the system. And speaking about the undocumented, the unrecognized, the unpaid, we speak of them as people, based on that radical idea that women are people too. But so I want to turn my second question, I want to talk about us being here in the university. And I think on this matter, there is agreement, while there might not be agreement on the, that the protections that we've had in the university were hard fought. They were not regulated by law, but law was enabling. And I would like to definitely, I think there are many faculty in the room, so we will all remember the time when there was our gender sensitization committee against sexual harassment. We had fluid, open-ended definitions of what sexual harassment was, of how procedure to actually inquire and to do either punitive action or reformation in the process, because we are also, nobody comes to us sui generis, everybody's been through the grinder, the organ grinder that produces men and women. We lost that in 2017. There were many internal reasons why we lost it, but just as that there were external reasons why we could talk about an anti-sexual harassment committee back in 1997, and this Miss Grover is one of the people who helped us frame rules that actually we felt that university communities could own. And they were not mandated by law, but we framed them anyway. And in 2017, when we lost the GS cash, we lost it not, we lost it and sold it not alone. In fact, today, the atmosphere across the country is that actually there's no sexual harassment anymore. It's gone, it's finished. I mean, ever since there was a momentous election, sexual harassment unelected itself. Right? And so it lost power. So we don't, and there are no functioning anti-sexual harassment committees anymore. So whether this is diluted from the larger debate, the fact that here at least and in Delhi University and in many other institutions, that these moments came and then they all departed simultaneously. And of course, we want to talk about what there is, and of course, a political context will become possible. But my final question is, how was the university? Was it institutions like this? Like today, right now, Jayati was just talking about. We had a crash in our university for where faculty's children, PhD scholars' children, workers' children were all ran a crash. All of that has gone. So is this moment that we are in 2017? What does a university do? What is the point of the discussion we are having? What is when we are faced with external and internal challenges? So very briefly, in 3 minutes each, yeah. Is it as bleak and hopeless? Two, it's not about getting those institutions back or whatever. I think that would be too long a discussion. But what does a university do right now? Do we just keep quiet that we have lost these institutions? Do we protest? Or are there more things that we can do meaningfully? Maybe first, then Vrinda, then Jayati.
Well, of course, we face enormous challenges.
Sound वो आवाज आ रही है. Just 1 second.
Okay, so we do face enormous challenges, and the biggest weapon against the university system is the new education policy, the national education policy, which is to end that. Okay, now? No. Okay, so the biggest weapon against the university system is public university. Against the public university is the NEP. And the NEP is intended to end access to education. It is intended to end diversity. It is diversity of thought. It's a long story. We don't have time to discuss the NEP. Now, we are faced with that. But when you say, and it's an important question to ask, what is the point of this discussion? I do believe that if it's a long struggle, and it may be a long struggle, a longer struggle than we thought when we started out in 2014, then that long struggle will be waged by the survival of ideas. If the ideas and the ideals of the public university survive, then the vast majority of people in this room who are dark-haired and below 30, there are ideas that will be taken forward, and there will be a memory. So I just want to actually end. I suddenly remember this very stark line from Capital, in which Marx says that by the 18th century, the memory of the relationship between the peasantry and the land had vanished. So the point of such discussions is that the memory should not vanish. And if it's a long struggle, so be it.
Actually, what Nehru is pointing us towards is what has been practiced not since 2014 but for long. Maybe we didn't pay adequate attention to things that were happening outside our lives, outside our own states. It's the politics of erasure. And that is a politics that the Indian state has practiced in different parts of the country. It has now come to all of us. So the issue, if to go back to the specific issue of sexual harassment and the struggles that actually gave rise to that kind of understanding and of some kind of mechanisms legal mechanisms to help us redress and address these situations, and actually provided a focal point of a very important conversation. It was not just about addressing the individual complaint, as people like Ayesha and many others sitting here who've been engaged in this for very, very long, very intensely. It was about providing a conversation where, from the classroom to the residence to everywhere else, the issue of dignity of women is central and is the core of sexual harassment, whether it is the wrestlers who are talking or anyone else. And as Mimi says, we therefore cannot abandon it. The state has dismantled all enabling processes, whether outside or within universities or any other internal mechanisms. I do, however, want to point that it's not a period of despair, because the issues arising over and over again in many, many spaces. What is that sexual harassment is a wrong is to make common sense. And that is a common sense that now no longer can be erased even by the state powers. There was a very interesting agreement that was a very interesting agreement, and you can Google, and in fact, do not read out such long CDs and take up our time. Tell people what our names are. If they like what we said, they'll Google us and find out. So it has some uses. Please Google and read about the Dindigul Trade Union Agreement of 2022. Dindigul being a place in Tamil Nadu. Right? Where the death of, in a textile garment factory, the repeated sexual harassment and the death of a Dalit woman worker, a factory that supplies to H&M, led to the trade union leading a huge battle, and H&M then signing agreements across the board, which is called the Dindigul Trade Union Agreement against gender-based harassment or sexual harassment. It's an extraordinary achievement in these times. And I really think we need to look at those victories, that it's an amazing victory.
Yeah, just final point. I mean, it is about recovering the past, it is about forging the future, and it's really meetings like this that enable you to think something through. Because finally, a lot of sexual harassment, yes, it's about dignity, but it's also about power. It's about relational power. And recognizing that in your own lives, in all the circumstances around you, is a huge step forward. So even before you start campaigning, which you all have to do, to get those structures back in place, that recognition itself is an enabling thing.
All right, so now the floor is open for questions. Are we going to pass around the mic or? Yeah. This is a question to anybody. What's your opinion of increasing legal marriageable age from women to 18 to 21? Considering the aspect that child marriage is still in practice, despite there is a law for it.
I think it's a terrible idea. Many women's groups have actually written to the government. There's a Jayati committee. The Jayati committee actually made a host of recommendations. The government only plucked this. And again, we know that it is actually an insidious way of targeting a particular community.
So I think maybe you should take this one. We say politeness, empathy, and sweetness are feminine traits, and strength and protectiveness are masculine traits. I want to ask, isn't this the genderification of trade?
Yes, of course, that it is very much. That is part of gender socialization. That is how we are produced by the gender machine as men and women. And the whole point is to become men and women rather than people with multiple possible gender identities. So yes, it's very much genderization. But I might want to say that there's a way in which qualities like empathy and so on, which we should value, become devalued because it's associated with women, and we might want to think about what that does to people who occupy the social position of men who have empathy, but then have to learn to abandon it. So you have to think about the violence of that as well.
So, when we discuss this, the question, when we discuss about laws and their feminist interpretation, how do you see the foundational law of the land, which is the Constitution, as being basically essentially gender biased? How do women become a part of this imagined community where imaginations have been restricted to these women men?
The Constitution actually is not, there are gaps in the Constitution, but the fact that it has articles on fundamental rights, on equality, non-discrimination, recognition of marginalization of women and other oppressed and structurally marginalized groups is actually the enabling part. And the disabling part is where the state, which is a masculine militaristic state, then has the final say in our lives. The criminal law system. The criminal law system has a principle by which it looks at reasonable men because that is the historical understanding, but one sees a shift taking place. So if you read to judgments that are coming out now in India, at least from across the country, they are often a very mixed bag, and that's good. There will be some terrible judgments on rape, where certain stereotypes and on consent will be seen, but at the same time, you'll have a judgment which will be shattering all those myths. So it's an evolution process, and the ideas are not born out of law or out of the judge's brain. They are actually ideas that are coming from the outside. And when they read, and actually the work of feminist scholars has played a huge role in judges comprehending and taking these ideas and changing their minds. It's not the law which does it, it's the feminist scholarship that does that. And the activism.
Okay, so this is the question that I'm going to pose to Jayati. So, what is the importance of disability in a feminist perspective? How is disability incorporated within a feminist narrative?
So this is a really good question because in fact a lot of feminist discussion has really not given it importance and priority. It's actually quite recently that there's much more discussion on intersectionality of different kinds and of multiple and intersecting deprivations or discrimination. So whether it is caste, which was also not adequately discussed earlier, or it is a range of other kinds of, or religion or other kinds of discrimination, all of those are now beginning to be discussed much more. In the case of disability, it's, I would argue, even more complex because unlike caste and religion, it's cross-cutting. It can affect people of all kinds. And it has different impacts depending on the extent, the nature, and the severity of the disability. So, I do believe that this is a very important. I happen to know there are a couple of students in JNU who are working on it, which is good. But it is really something that is not adequately studied. Once you recognize intersecting inequalities and intersecting types of discrimination, then the standard responses you give are often too simplistic and not as nuanced enough, but even the policies that we argue for and we fight for have to be revised and rethought. So it's really important to bring that right in the front. I completely agree.
I just wanted to add to this something I learned from the work of Nivedita Menon, who has made the point that if feminist philosophy takes on board visibility seriously, then we will have to rethink the idea of autonomy as a value. Because then we would have to focus on the way in which all of us are dependent on one another, need to care for one another. There's always a moment at which you're dependent. Nobody is independent at all times. Nobody, no human being, not just people with disability. So it's interesting that from this point of view, autonomy is not the value, but interdependence is the value, and I think that's an important feminist insight. Agency rather than autonomy, I think.
Yeah, there are many, and the top of the box I want to ask last because a lot of people have questions on one particular issue. No, stop. Okay, but I can't even juggle this. So, Vrinda, will you please comment? So, what do you think of the issue of intimate partner violence, which happens both in the home space and the workplace? And why is it not addressed in the law outside the heteropatriarchal marriage system?
Intimate partner violence is barely addressed in even formal marriages. In terms of address, means a person can complain and receive some kind of redress. Because the law, as Nehru very rightly said, it doesn't want to, for various reasons which you all know, it doesn't want to recognize certain information because they do disrupt the patriarchal formation, and so those will therefore not be recognized formally by law. The intimate partner is also based again on what Jayati began with about keeping that unit intact. Let me answer this very differently. Courts don't have time. There are too many cases. It's a fact. It's impossible for judges to deliver judgments and do all the court work. The one place where all courts pause, whether it is the Supreme Court or a district court, is when a couple, a heterosexual couple, goes for a divorce. Courts make time. Judges make time. They have in-chamber hearings. Their mandate is save the marriage. Can anything be done to save the marriage? We have a full mediation center. I have nothing against mediation. I think it's a good idea. Rather than people going through lengthy legal processes and things can be resolved either which way. But courts give a lot of time if they can somehow persuade the couple to not break and continue to live together. And I've always wondered that the court has no time to get the most important matters on which lives of hundreds and thousands of people depend. If a couple has come to the court, surely they're adult enough to figure out whether they want to get together or not. And in India, from the neighbor to the auntie to the uncle, everybody has advised you before you reach the courtroom. Now you have the judge who says, don't break the marriage. What is it about the marriage and the family unit which is not to be broken? So recognizing the pervasiveness of intimate partner violence, which in many ways is foundational to marriage, and the violence of paranoia of our system. So it will not recognize and give address. I feel intimate partner violence, given the way the police system, etc., works, we need different mechanisms, not the criminal law mechanism, because it will not get you what you need, which is basically protection, injunction, keep that person away, you continue to live your life. So we need a system that is more friendly to the person who's suffering the violence rather than go to the police station where no complaint is going to get lodged.
Answering the little treasure of questions, and we have exactly 4 minutes. So, what I have decided with my wife is to make Joyfully answer one question, Nivedita and Vrinda, these most of the other questions related comments that you made. There's also a lot of questions about Joyfully and on paper. But what specific question to Jayati is on the question of defining work. Time use survey of help. Maybe it could help, but it is evidence that women workers, especially homemakers, do not themselves perceive their care work as work. There is an international idea of only looking at work within the productive frontiers. How do we fix this?
So the good news is that actually it's at one level fixed. Okay? The ILO, the International Conference of Labor Statisticians, they've all accepted that work it can be outside the production boundary. So we actually have now since 2014 agreement on this at an international level. Therefore, time use survey matter. It doesn't. The time use survey will compare. Did you work yesterday? It will actually either ideally follow people around, but otherwise track everything they did over the last week. So you're actually allocating. So I will track the kids. I did this. I did that. You're looking at half-hour slots. It's also complicated because women multitask. Right? So they're doing many things at once. They are trying in the survey now increasingly to actually take account of that as well. It's not perfect, it's not ideal, but the results are striking. They are very, they come out very, very clearly. At least 70% of unpaid work in most societies is done by women and girls. In some societies, it's as high as 90%. Women, on average, depending on which country and region, work more than 5 or 6 hours per week. Generally, in some cases, they work more than 20 hours per week unpaid. So it's all, there's a lot of that. How do we change the recognition of work is by actually, first of all, collecting this data on a regular basis and disseminating it, putting it there along with the GDP data, along with other data that everyone says is holy. And if people say, oh, but this involves various problems and it's inaccurate, you should see how GDP data are calculated. That would disabuse you of any notion that that is an indicator of anything. We will mark it up. Okay? So, yeah, I don't think time use surveys are the way to go on this.
Okay, so we can go on 15 minutes more, is that okay? Yeah? Because now all my colors don't make any sense. Huh? Please देखो करेंगे, there's some great questions here. My God, I wish you people would listen to class like this, yeah? Okay? Alright, so there are a host of questions on that today. And I want to, so I think anybody can address them because I don't think we actually, yeah. So I'm going to just pick one of the minority rates. If there was a bundle, I would have taken one for this, but it's I think a very interesting question. Why making marital rape a reason for divorce? Maybe? It's a very progressive thing for women. If rape isn't penalized, does it not undermine the heinousness of the act of rape?
See, the issue is that inside marriage, which is already, as I've said several times, a violent institution, there is a way in which we are mystifying sexual violence as worthy of putting someone in jail for, when the regular other non-sexual violence of the marriage let's say if she's beaten, yes, that is a criminal act. But somehow there is a feeling that rape is the worst thing. So you see, the way the question is posed, the heinousness of rape. is participating in the process of treating rape as the act that violates yourself, when in fact violence of multiple kinds violates the woman, and marriage itself can be demeaning and humiliating in multiple ways. So I think we need to, and this is an argument that many feminists have made, we need to demystify rape as the worst thing that can happen to you. Why is it worse than all the routine domestic abuse and violence and humiliation and so on? So I think we need to open our minds so that there can be fair divorce with maintenance. That's what we should be fighting for. Women should have maintenance, should be able to have look after their children. If there's that, she never wants to live with this man anymore, in any case, right? So that's what I would say to this. Okay, so why do we think that unless something is in the Indian Penal Code, it's not heinous? Where did this? See, this is I don't want the law to capture your imagination and understanding. That's not what law should do. And that is what law is doing, and that's a problem. So while I am not saying, I don't necessarily agree with certain ways of approaching an issue that maybe may have, but at the same time, I find this question actually troubling. What you regard as heinous, till it is reflected in the penal code, it will not be heinous. It will be heinous if we as a society determine that something is wrong, and it doesn't therefore have to carry a sentence, because the logic of that is, therefore the most heinous the state must go around hanging people or giving life incarceration, etc. That is a punitive route that the state is setting out for us. Should marital, I think in principle, the exception to marital rape in the Indian Penal Code needs to go, because it cannot have any place in a law which has to meet the touchstone of constitutional equality. Therefore, it has to go. Do women necessarily need to take the recourse to criminal law? Women can really take recourse to protection of women from domestic violence act, etc., also. So, I think we need to recognize that rape takes place in marriage, if you delete the exception. Do we need to then go further? It's something that we should look at the times we are living in also. I want to, that is my experience, you're getting no help from your police, legal system, so what we are doing? In this university,
so there are a number of questions. So many of them make a similar point as that one. So on the marital rape issue, whether there is also a question, a set of questions about whether why would we want to treat marital rape as distinct from rape? In the sense that one is in a criminal law, that's not exactly what the questions say, but I'm paraphrasing it. Why would you want me to talk about a special category for marital rape, whereas ordinary rape remains within the criminal law? Right? So that is, I think, the sense of it. But I think I want to maybe this will have to be the last question that I go on. I think there's a very small question, which is a very good question. So we're talking about women, gender, feminism. What is gender? Is it just binary? Is as economic subjects, and are people only male and female, men and women? What role does the idea of gender have? How relevant is the idea of gender? And have why discussion today?
Okay, I think there's no doubt it's a social construction. It's not biological really in that sense, and it's much more complex than it was earlier. It's not binary for sure, but it's
purpose as a social construction, I am sorry to keep repeating the same thing, is to control labor, which means that it's not only the labor so-called defined women, but it is a broader category of people whose labor it is controlling. On top of that, then we have various other social, cultural norms, constructs, patterns of behavior, etc., that are imposed on people depending on what society decides their gender is. And as you get those who are breaking away from it, then they have to break away not only from those norms and conceptions and expectations, but they also have to actually forge different identities in terms of their work, which are quite complex as well. I mean, it is still the case, certainly in India, that we are so into different occupational segmentations that different types of gender also determine particular types of work as well.
In law, these are inherited categories, as I said, from a colonial law. If you look at the Indian Penal Code, it says in section 2 it defines, or it's the definition section, it says man includes woman. Now you have we live in, fortunately we moved to a time where you have the John judgment, you have the Nalsa judgment, which has decriminalized homosexuality, and the Nalsa judgment gives recognition to other gender identities, and I think that is something that is only going to move forward in the formal legal sphere, both with respect to sexual orientation and gender identities, about giving recognition and therefore consequential rights. So the law actually gets very muddy because law cannot understand complexity, and it likes to keep things very. It speaks in a language which is confusing, but has no ability to grapple with complexity. And gender actually, if you look at gender not as a binary, it's actually very good, and I think it's very good for the feminist agenda, because it will have to speak against patriarchy, it will have to not look at men and women biologically, and therefore the alliance between the feminist movement and other alliances which have been there in this country for long. I don't think we are in the same space there, and I don't think we have time to get into that, but there's a huge thing going on in the West, in the UK, etc., about gender determination. There's these votes that are happening in England and in Scotland, and there's a huge argument going on what rights will be for women and what rights will be for trans persons, which is not a conversation between those movements, but actually a collision and a spat for public space that is taking place. And I think in India we are not in that space also because traditionally there have been recognition. We have to see how to take that forward.
Yeah, I have another question, but this is the absolute last. In the face of a lack of institutional spaces for queer people, reference here a lack of gender neutral hostels in the university or something as simple as an inclusion of gender neutral pronouns in the university constitution. How should the queer and trans people respond to the assimilation into this binaristic architecture? How should we respond to the invisibilization, which is educated, and infantilization felt by the gender sexual?
That's actually linked to the improvement to the no, the only way we can respond is by challenge. So there needs to be, we would have to write multiple letters simply to have Dr. Miss and Dr. Mrs. removed from the list of faculty members. And we have been people have written letters for decades before that change. But that's a very small thing. But this, this Dr. Miss, it's not small, but what I mean is, it's so 19th century that you wonder how long you have to talk about that. So two things about the first question. I'd like to just, apart from what Jayati and Vrinda said, I just want to add that we must remember that the assignment of gender at birth is a phenomenon that begins with modern medicine. So when you assign gender at birth, then there is a commitment to maintaining that gender. And what happens if you are assigned gender X and because the whole business of assigning gender is at that point of birth determined by the presence or absence as it seems to the doctor of the fetus. So later, what happens is something happens, or it turns out that most probably you are, as most of us might be, intersex. Then you have to keep disciplining that body, hormone treatments, physical interventions, etc. So there is a huge intervention from the so-called natural biological body until you hide your lack of match. I mean, if there was someone standing at that door right now and conducting a gender test on each of us as we be, it would have to include a complete match of hormones, chromosome, and your physical, the external organs, and with probably an X-ray for your internal organs. And by that, many of us would not pass a gender test because some of us are too old to have the requisite female hormones, some of us may have hysterectomies. There would be young teenage boys with what are called female hormones. You see, they're not female and male hormones, they're hormones. They're in all our bodies. We all have estrogen and testosterone. So, of course, I'm just adding the biological edge to the political philosophical argument that Vrinda and legal argument that Vrinda and Jayati made. That there's I seem to be saying bad things, but imagine a world in which gender was not declared. How would you bring up that child? What does someone mean when they say I'm longing for a daughter? What does that mean? It means something. What does it mean? How do you bring up that child? Why is it so meaningful to you that the child should be a daughter, right? So suppose you imagine a world in which you don't assign gender at birth, then you could actually imagine a very different kind of world. But about what should we do, what should all of us do for gender inclusive language or for, in fact, gender neutral language and so on, what we have to do is what we've always done. Fight for it, campaign for it, write leaflets, write pachas, write letters to the administration, have events, start using that language yourself. But there is one small thing I would add here that I'm happy to use they, but I also want to keep using she because it's only been 10 years or so since she started being able to be used as the universal pronoun. When you say a philosopher something, she must, right? That was like a big shock when it happened 10 years ago. That has barely been in place where again she is being invisibilized by they. So I would say let's keep she, let's keep they, let's keep he. You might want someone who presents themselves as female, saying I want to be referred to as he and him. Let's confuse the gender space, I think. So what should we do? We should do it.
Just to say also that it doesn't necessarily depend on the pronoun. I mean, Bengal is a very patriarchal place, but we don't have gender pronouns. So we're patriarchal anyway.
Linguists here will not each other wisely to this. I am going to finally wave the linguistic flag. Because please do not do the politics that you want, the politics of language, only over the language English. How would you possibly say, indicate a change in gender in a language like Hindi, which I can assure you is not full of progressive, non-patriarchal, non-safe, non-head. In fact, it's an extremely negative language. People say no, our societies are negative. But we only have a pronoun which is he, that. And to make this the locus of activity, which to make these pronouns is also down that there is another erasure. The erasure of the other languages we speak. And I think that if you want the debate, certainly can be there for English. But the debate or the discussion should also be there for our language. And not only in the university constitutions. And it's not very far this is about getting Dr. This out of the JNU directory. Went away, but then it came back. Now we have to write 6 communications a day to say I'm not going to be called Dr. Kidwai. So, some battles are going. On that note, I want to thank our panelists and for this very I think we are really glad with this incredible audience for actually for all of us they to see the JNU came back again. It's one Before we close, I would like to announce that we have more sections which will be not in this intimate space, so it could be began here, something like studies, but of the founding ideas behind the education university, the program, we are all over. I think we can start announcing tomorrow. Thank you very, very much for making yourself.